Perfect height. 3.
Alright, do you want to start off, Alice?
Sure. Do you think that the action New Zealand's government is currently taking on climate change is sufficient and does justice to our future generations? If not, what goals and actions would you push for in the next term if elected?
I think the short story is that no government is doing enough. It's something where it's really important to have ambition and to move forward as hard as you can. I'm going to sort of now put in brackets, and I'm not an expert in the area, and climate change is not one of my specialities, but some of the things I think are important is to make sure that we don't shift agriculture out, that in fact we bring it in as soon as possible, so that the costs there, which are really important for New Zealand, so that we can be properly focused on where we can make the biggest difference, and where we are special and different, and agriculture as the area. Bringing agriculture into the ETS as soon as possible then puts the economic incentives on the sector to make progress on its emissions.
Cool, thank you.
In your opinion, is the ETS in its current form an equitable system that delivers sufficient economic signals to emitters? What changes would you advocate to make it more effective, if any?
I think if it was implemented, the system is okay. I think what we've got to keep on talking about then is what are we talking about the actual costs? How what is the timing for bringing things in, and what are the disincentives, if you like, that end up being placed on it. So I think it is a relatively good system. Some people would argue that just a straight carbon charge is a better way of doing things. But I think when you do something which is internationally negotiated, you buy into it, then you're better to stick with that than try and invent a new New Zealand only type scheme.
Thanks for that. What are your opinions on the expansion of fossil fuel industries? Obviously, like lignite down in South Island and oil and gas exploration. So what are your opinions on that?
I was the minister in charge of solid energy at the time they bought a pile of land because it had lignite under it, and I did that as a part of a deliberate policy in order to make sure that the government, through the SOE that it owned, although I now note the current government is proposing to sell it, actually had some control over the industry, and therefore you could work it in a way which was socially responsible and economically responsible as well. I'm of the view that at some stage that is going to be a really valuable resource. The briefings that I've had is that it is the equivalent of about 400 years of vehicle fuels power sitting there for New Zealand. At the moment, we don't have the technology to use it properly. Right. My best guess is that the right way of using it will be a combination of sequestration and hydrogen fuel cell development. I think that the technology to do that is there now, but it's too expensive. So it's not yet economic to do that. And my view is that until you can get sequestration right, and preferably also the fuel cell technology going, because that will work both for vehicles and also for a lot of places where, for example, we have lines running, electricity lines running, where it's not viable. Where spent time in the Marlborough Sound, for example, whole pile of rural areas where we spend an enormous amount string power lines, where with a combination of micro wind, solar, with a battery backup, and the hydrogen fuel cell batteries look like they're going to be the best, then we can make them self-sufficient.
Okay.
So the answer is, and what I'm definitely saying is that some of the sort of like pelletisation and putting it out to use it for in ways which are quite irresponsible shouldn't happen.
Right, that's great to hear. Do you, leading on from that, do you personally support the call for a 10-year moratorium on new coal and lignite development?
The short answer is I don't know, because I don't know what the time period is going to be until this other... I mean, as far as lignite's concerned, it's almost certainly going to be more than 10 years until the technology catches up with the economics. Because there's an interesting formula, as assuming peak oil we're past it, and then other and costs of traditional fuels go up, it then makes the alternative fuels much more attractive and therefore viable. I don't know yet the shape of the crossover, and so you have the double provisions around getting it environmentally right, but it's got to work economically. I don't know where that crossover is. And as far as new coal is concerned, I don't know if there are any new coal areas in New Zealand. I mean, there's different ways of mining them, but I don't think there's anywhere that hasn't already been mined. You mean I mean, obviously there's some proposals on the west coast which will be massive changes.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of development over what's been done before.
I'm pretty reluctant to see just sort of like massive coal excavations to send coal to China to burn it off there. Having said that, again, having Minister of Energy and Minister of SOEs, there have been a couple of occasions in our recent history, including this week, where coal has been pretty important in ensuring power supply. And it is a last resort. It's dirty. It's really expensive. Coal, obviously compared to water, wind, and geothermal generation is enormously expensive. So there's a disincentive to use it. But I don't think we're yet at the point of saying that we should totally stop it.
Great. Thanks a lot. There you go.
What do you see as the main future sources of energy for electricity, transport and heating for New Zealand? Do you support the call for the government to create an action plan to attain 100% renewable energy before 2050?
I haven't got the expertise to know whether 100% renewable by that date is possible, but I'd be interested in seeing a plan to get us there. Working through the future sources of energy, my view is that there's room in New Zealand for a lot more wind. There's room for quite a lot more geothermal power. I think geothermal power is a really good baseload power. It's something that renewable geothermal. We are the world leaders in it. We export our technology to the west coast of the Americas, where they have similar geological things as we do. So I think that's that's where we can go there. I don't know about solar. I'm just it might be that some of our micro situations we can do more solar, but and there's bits of micro hydro that can happen as well. I've seen a number of farm-based plants which during milking time are not enough for that particular farms, but most of the day will be feeding back into the grid, and as long as we can get our pricing right, so that it's basically neutral. If you're buying it at X, you can sell it at X. Then a lot of those plants are quite viable. A lot of farms have big water races, and you can get these small units. So I think, but I don't think there's again I know that there's an application on the west coast that I don't know much about, but I've got a feeling we're getting pretty close to finished damming rivers in any sort of major scale. So I don't think there's going to be a lot more, macro hydro. There's sort of like a related question. At some stage in the future, and certainly in that period, Tiwai Point will have to face proper electricity prices. At the moment it gets it cheap. And
do you know how subsidised that is?
The answer is no. I mean, notwithstanding being the minister, I don't know at the time. I don't know the direct commercial arrangements for that. But it is what I do know is it's been really important to Meridian, and there are special arrangements on really for customer, and to use it another way would require quite a change in transmission. We'd need to do more transmission lines, and I can't remember the technical details, but the further you send electricity, the more your losses are. So part of our problem is we need it in Auckland, and the dams are at the bottom of the South Island. So that's that is that's an issue. The problems around Christchurch, of course, they need less than they at the moment. So it's electricity transport. There's I said before around the possibility of fuel cell electric transport. I think that's the long-term thing. But there are a lot of other things we can do. I mean, I think we badly underutilise our railways. Notwithstanding the RENA, we badly underutilise coastal shipping in New Zealand, and you can be much more energy efficient than having the big trucks that are going around. There's also location questions as far as industry is concerned. There's big questions around public transport. I'm assuming that there'll be major environmental advantages of doing the rail loop in Auckland, getting cars off the road there.
Rail to the airport too.
Yep, rail to the airport, but actually more decent rail down south, down to Mangere, Manukau, down there as well. My understanding is that getting decent passenger lines running there is much more important than the airport. The airport's sort of like a little branch line off that line.
If you go to Manukau, I guess you can get a branch line.
So there's all of that can make a difference to transport. I'm not a heating expert. I mean, I'm told that solar is something that can be used and build it into the building standards, but the economics of it is still not that good. But what we do know, there's a lot of evidence around the advantages of insulation, and I think that a bit of progress has been made in the last 5 or 6 years, and that there's room for a lot more yet.
Yeah. Sure. Do you think the government should do more to promote research, development and deployment of low carbon and more sustainable technologies and practices in New Zealand? And if so, what?
Yes, and I think in 2 ways. One is just a straight neutral research and development tax credits, which were designed to encourage companies to do more. The other is targeted research grants, which can either go into the private sector or into the university academic sector, depending on or the CRIs, depending on at what level. I mean, I think that for example, IRL are doing some good work in hydrogen fuel cell battery development, and sometimes just putting a bit of extra money into that sort of thing can advance the technology and make the possibility of it more viable. So really, there's 2 sorts. There's just general for anyone who wants to have a go at research, and there'll be a lot of companies which that would make it. The credits which used to be there be taken away would make a difference to them doing more research and development. But I think because it's an important area, then targeted science money is also important.
Just thinking whether we should jump down to the last question, but maybe we'll keep going through.
Yeah.
Do you perceive New Zealand's dependence on oil as a risk to our economy in the age of high and increasing oil prices?
Yeah. Well, the short answer is yes. I mean, we suffer from geographical isolation. There's no enormous obligations that people feel towards New Zealand around fuel supply. We do have some agreements with other countries in emergency times, but there's no doubt over the longer term we're going to suffer, and part of that is because we're a relatively spread out, lowly populated country. We are more reliant, especially on cars, than most countries. We're less reliant on oil as a fuel heating source than, say, the United States and much of Europe. But as far as vehicles are concerned, we are dependent, and therefore, I think I sort of implied it earlier. Public transport is important, but we've also got to look at freight. As all of the predictions are for freight to just to keep on. Well, as the economy grows, the freight is growing more and more, and that's in diverting some of that money would be a good thing. And it's pretty clear from the policy stuff that we're developing that we do think that's important. And there's also been what I think has been a bit of almost like a political bias towards roads. I think last time we were government we did some shifting away from that. That's reversed, but there's a good argument that we didn't go far enough when we were there either.
Yeah. So would you say that that you would support the reallocation of spending on new roads?
So I'm not saying all spending on new, but as a principle, I'm not saying all spending on new roads, but significant parts of that spending, because it can save. And part of it sort of gets into a sort of technical accounting and government accounting and legal thing, but I mean there are some real alternatives to roads, and it's often better to spend the money on those and to have your system set up to consider those on a more even basis.
Sure. Great, thanks a lot.
What actions, if any, would you take in your electorate to enable your community to increase their understanding of climate change and to reduce their emissions and dependence on oil?
Okay, I think you'll probably tell from this interview I haven't got enormous expertise or leadership in the area myself, but I'm certainly willing to work with groups that do, and I've also got the view that while some of the stuff is really important the governments do, I think if we can change personal practice, that can make a difference too, and sometimes the combination of two.
Sure.
I'm a cyclist. There are plenty of places in my electorate where cycling is a bit hairy. The roads are not well set up for it, and I have been working with the council. I've made some progress in a number of places to get improvements, but that is the sort of thing that I can see myself having a role in locally.
The last one. How can young New Zealanders convince the government to take stronger action on climate change?
I think part of what you're doing now is a good way of doing that. You're drawing people's attention to it, and I think that's important. And doing it in a pre-election time is also a useful way of seeing where people stand and advising others on it. I think that at some stage, if people get what I described as a reasonable set of commitments, and ask each of the political parties to do it, and by reasonable I mean stretch, but not outrageous. So you want something that a mainstream party could sign up to most of. It doesn't have to be all of them, and some others that are a bit stretch, and getting people in asking people to sign up to that, you cause a focus back on the issue.
Yes.
Great, thanks for your time.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Could we possibly get a photo with you?
Yeah,
Got
sure.
Got a camera? Put it on a
Got Photoshop, have you?
Yeah. Of course, if you require it.
I love so many videos on YouTube, with the Speaker of the House and stuff. I went to Question Time most days this year. You brought a lot of light to the debates, I have to say.
I don't always agree with the speaker and his rulings, but we have fun working it out.
Yeah, no, I had a chat with Rock and he said, you do have a bit of fun.
Yeah, no, I think
you also have to change it.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a degree of mutual respect. I think generally he's done a good job, but